Shalom, friends. Today we're going to talk about President Donald Trump and his idea of relocating the citizens and residents of the Gaza Strip. But before that, a quick update. As of the time of this recording, Agam Berger, 19-year-old IDF soldier, is back in Israel, and Arbel Yahud and Moshe are with the Red Cross and will be back in Israel shortly. And as far as I'm aware, 5 Thai workers will also be returned today. So this is as at the time of recording. Possibly by the time you see this, there'll be more positive developments. Now, what I'd like to talk about today, and I mentioned this in the last session, is the ideas that have been floating around, the rumors that have been circulating, the news reports that Donald Trump has raised a few ideas that in the past have been taboo. And I want to explain why, and then I'll tell you what the ideas are. So, up until 1967, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Judea and Samaria, known also by some as the West Bank, were under control of 3 Arab countries: Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, respectively. And during that time, there were no Palestinian, quote-unquote, aspirations for a country. And no one ever talked about it. But after Israel, in the 1967 war, which was a defensive war started by Israel as a response to acts of aggression by Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, specifically that the Egyptian military command took control of the Syrian army and that the Egypt blocked the Suez Canal, and so on and so forth. And these were clearly acts of aggression. There was also a diversion of the water from the water sources of the Sea of Galilee in Syria, and so on. I'm not going to go into all the details, but after Israel captured those 3 areas, suddenly, out of the blue, the Arabs and Bedouin tribes living in this area called themselves Palestinians and wanted a country, which they didn't want up until that point. And then, for about 20 years, there was a stalemate and nothing happened. And then in the late 80s, and in particular the early 90s, this whole concept of the Madrid peace talks and the Oslo Accords started, where the idea of the roadmap to peace, according to the Clinton administration, and the idea of the 2-state solution, that there would be an Israeli state alongside a Palestinian state, came up. Now, this again disregards the whole concept that there is a Palestinian state. It's called Jordan, or Transjordan, and it is 70% Palestinian, and that the whole concept was that that would be a state for the Palestinians, and the east bank of the west bank of the Jordan River would be a state for the Jews. That is also not taken into consideration the partition plan of 1947 and so on and so forth, which was rejected by the Arabs, who opened a war, the War of Independence. Again, not going into all of those details. Of course, we can do that another time. But in the early 90s, the whole concept of the roadmap to peace and the 2-state solution became the virtual only option. That's the only thing that people talked about as a solution to the Middle East crisis between Israel and the Palestinians that would bring peace to the Middle East and happiness to all. Now, as it turns out, the Palestinian people and their corrupt and evil leadership never wanted peace and rejected every attempt at peace. The phrase is, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Best exemplified by Yasser Arafat rejecting the very far left-leaning, very in favor of peace Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, who offered him about 97 or 99% of the territory that he wanted, and that wasn't good enough. And they opened what's known as the Second Intifada, which was a 4-year war against Israel. Nevertheless, this concept of the two-state solution remained, and remained all the way until about a week ago. And if anyone were to dare bring up the idea of encouraging Palestinians to immigrate away from this war-torn area, for example, to Canada, and possibly to give them a large sum of money and encourage them to start a new life elsewhere, they were condemned as racist, bigot, far-right, religious zealots, crazy, warmongering, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and so on and so forth. And the term in Hebrew is transfer, which of course comes from the English transfer. And this concept is only spoken about in whispers, because if you ever speak it out loud to the mainstream media, legacy media, it's instantly condemned. But here, and this is already a great achievement by President Donald Trump, he brought this up a week ago as an idea of the Gaza Strip is a complete mess, is completely destroyed, has been a hell on earth for the last 2 decades, and that the residents of the Gaza Strip should be relocated, temporarily or not, there are 2 separate ideas, to other countries. For example, he brought up the idea of temporarily relocating them to Indonesia while the Gaza Strip was cleared of its rubble and rebuilt into something much nicer. Another more recent idea, more recent of a week ago, so we're talking about 4 days ago, was to immigrate 100,000 residents of Gaza to Albania. The Albanian premier said that that is fake news, it didn't happen and it won't happen, and the Albanian population of 2.8 million cannot accept 100,000 Palestinians, and they feel terrible that the residents of Gaza were dehumanized by the Hamas leadership, and that they suffered the war brought on by the atrocities of October 7th. I'm quoting him, but they are not unable to take them. Additionally, President Donald Trump said that he hopes that King Abdullah of Jordan and Prime Minister Sisi, President Sisi, my apologies to Mr. Assisi, President Sisi of Egypt will be willing to take some of the residents of Gaza. He said that he believes that they're able to. He knows that this is a tough neighborhood, but that they are friends, and that America has helped Egypt a lot, and that Egypt should help America. Sources within Egypt have, on the one hand, completely denied this, and on the other hand, said that such talks are in the works, but they have to be kept on the down low in order to not cause opposition from the people in Egypt. Now, this is not a surprise, because ever since the 1940s, the people living here, the residents between the river and the sea, have been used and weaponized by the Arab world to fight against Israel, which also has been used and weaponized by the Arab world to be the scapegoat for all the corruption and problems in their countries. So they have to keep paying lip service to this idea of Palestinians living in Palestine and having a state, but in reality, they never cared about them, and they couldn't care about them any less now. Egypt hates the Hamas. Jordan, the Hashemite kingdom, is terrified of the Palestinians because 70% of their kingdom is Palestinians. Oh, and by the way, they're second-class citizens. Jordan, now that's an apartheid. But in any case, and similarly, the rest of the world doesn't really feel very favorable towards them. But that said, I heard about 2 weeks ago that Canada said they're willing to accept some Palestinians and even give them $3,000, probably Canadian, in order to help them relocate. So there is movement in this regard. This is a subject that was so taboo that it couldn't even be discussed. And now, thanks to Donald Trump, this is on the table. This is an out-of-the-box thinking that is on the table. 2 days ago, the Donald Trump special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who was the one who pushed forward the hostage deal, which, as you know, I have mixed feelings about, went to Saudi Arabia and spoke with them about the post-Gaza war Middle East. And then he came here to Israel and told the leadership here that there's a lot of positive thoughts and movements in that regard, but that more work needs to be done, of course. This is not a secret. But the feeling of the Israeli politicians and diplomats is that Donald Trump is not just shooting his mouth off. He's not just running his mouth. This is part of his grand plan. And you know what? I pray to God that it works. As Donald Trump said, we want to move them out of here so that they can live a normal life, even a pleasant life, somewhere else. And you know what? I'm guessing that that's what they want too. Hundreds of thousands of residents of Gaza have had to pay tens of thousands of dollars in order to get the permits to leave and to live a normal life somewhere else. They want nothing better than to get out of here. Now, sure, in theory, from a national perspective, they have this idea of this is their land, but practically each person just wants to live his own life. In fact, there were reports of hundreds of Gazans who went back to the north a couple days ago this week, saw how destroyed the place was, and then went back south to the tents and just said, you know, what's up there? There's nothing left up there. On another note that relates to it, of course, because that's what we're talking about today, I heard a report that there is an understanding between Israel and President Trump. Obviously, this may be just a conspiracy and maybe not real, but that the Americans will intentionally slow down the rebuilding of northern Gaza in order to keep the situation bad, in order to encourage the Gazans to immigrate out. But, you know, again, not opposed to that, but we'll see what happens. That's about it for now in that regard. There's a million other things we could talk about, like hostages being held in UN compounds and so on and so forth, but we're not going to get to that today. So what I do want to ask you, I was surprised that the last video, the deep dive into the Supreme Court, was as popular as it was. And I'd like to ask you that if you enjoy this content and these videos, click subscribe so that the YouTube algorithms share it and publicize it to more people. Because if you enjoy it, then I'm going to assume that other people like it too. So thank you very much, and God bless you.